Noel Rubinton, Deerfield class of 1973 and a former Newsday reporter whose work has appeared in the Atlantic and the Washington Post, visited campus to meet with students and share his new book, Looking for a Story, a complete guide to the writings of John McPhee. I welcomed Noel back to Deerfield and sat down with him for a conversation about his work and his admiration for McPhee, a fellow Deerfield alumnus. Noel, welcome back to Deerfield. It's great to have you here. I loved the class you did this morning with our seniors and your meeting just now with the scroll. But before we get going, a couple people have mentioned to me that we don't have appropriate intro music, an appropriate intro ditty for the podcast. So I'm putting out a call to our music department and our students for some kind of musical intro to the podcast. So hopefully we'll get something, and there'll be a special dispensation given to the students who find me that little piece of music. So the first question I wanted to ask you, Noel, is how did you come to Deerfield?
So I came to Deerfield via John McPhee. When I was in probably 7th grade, maybe beginning of 8th grade in New York City, I decided I was bored with school, as probably only a 13 or 14-year-old could decide for himself. And I wanted to find a new place to go to school. And I had no idea how to do it. And I had no idea that really what boarding school was. And somehow in the process, my parents gave me a copy of the Headmaster. And I read it because I respected my parents and their taste in literature and history. And I sat down and read it in one sitting. And literally on the spot, I decided I'm going to go to Deerfield.
Amazing.
And I never changed my story. I did humor my mother by going to one school to visit, which I won't name, but I wasn't considering.
Feel free to name.
So it was really because of him. It exposed me to kind of the spirit of Deerfield and to Frank Boyden and the history, which was incredibly attractive to me. I came up here and I was sold.
Yeah, we share that. My first introduction to Deerfield was my first year teaching when a friend, a former teacher, gave me a copy of the Headmaster. And I vividly remember laying down on a couch one Sunday afternoon and like you, reading it straight through. Who would have thought many years later I would be here? How did John McPhee come to Deerfield?
So he came to Deerfield, in a way that's probably not unlike a lot of people. His mother decided he wasn't ready for college. He went through Princeton High School, and she said, "No, you're not ready. You're not mature enough." He tells the story on himself now. And she decided that Deerfield was the place. How did she decide? Well, she had a friend in Princeton who had a son who sadly came to Deerfield, graduated, John Bradley Rush, in the class of 1936, and was killed in World War II, and is memorialized in a very touching way in a water fountain near the John Williams house. And Mrs. Rush, Alma Rush, said to John McPhee's mother, Deerfield is the place where he should go, and that's where he went.
That's amazing. That water fountain has just been restored as well by Brett Gawanter, who works on our grounds team. He took that.
So now if you come here and look at that water fountain, you'll know why John McPhee came to Deerfield.
Yeah, that's a great story. When you read The Headmaster, was that your first encounter with McPhee's writing?
Completely. It was his second book. He had written A Sense of Where You Are about Bill Bradley.
Yes.
I was unaware of it. That was the next book of his I read.
Yeah.
But it was my first book of his.
Yeah. I learned a lot reading your book, Looking for a Story. One of the things I learned, and I need to order it, is that The Headmaster was republished with a second profile written by the journalist Nat Hentoff,
Yes.
a public school teacher. Have you read that book? I'm curious.
I read part of the Nat Hentoff part.
Yeah.
I have it's a slim paperback.
Yeah.
It's like a double book. It's a kind of a bizarre publishing. Two different publishers who came to agreement to publish these books. One about a public school principal in New York City, and one about a private school headmaster in Massachusetts.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great pairing. I'm gonna purchase that. So let's turn to the book itself.
What was the origin of it? Like, how did you decide to write this book about McPhee?
Well, I've been a writer ever since before I came to Deerfield, certainly through Deerfield, through college, and through my career working for newspapers, for nonprofits. And over the years, more and more, I wanted to write a book because that seemed like my Mount Everest to climb. And I tried a few things, that were interesting but didn't quite work out. And I was stopped. And one day, about 5 years ago, this idea just came to me. And it was just magical how it just kind of came into my brain that I was going to do a book about John McPhee.
Yeah, amazing. Tell me a little bit about how you collaborated with him over the course of its research and writing.
Well, I had been reading his books for a long time, so I knew a lot about him, a lot about his writing, but I'd never met him. And I was obviously very intimidated about approaching him, didn't know if he'd be interested. Eventually, I approached him first through an intermediary at Princeton, and then he directly wrote back and said he was interested
So you
in the
wrote him a
project.
letter.
I wrote an email,
Yeah.
and he said that he was interested, and we agreed we would meet. I went to make the first of what have been a dozen or so visits to his house in Princeton. This was back now in November of 2021. And he was extremely enthusiastic about the idea. I kind of akin it to somebody offering to clean up all your closets, organize all your closets for you in a literary way. He's been very forthcoming. I mean, he's been an active participant in the project. When I would come to see him, I would sit in his office, and he had set up a bridge table. And on the bridge table, he would always put materials that he collected for me. Like he'd done his homework between visits and for me to go through of his. Without his cooperation, the book wouldn't have been anywhere near what it is because he has such an incredible memory of what he's done and how he put things together. And so he's kind of put out the breadcrumbs for me to find even the hardest things to find.
Yeah. You mentioned last night to the students in your talk that all of his pieces for Time magazine were unsigned,
Right.
and you had to figure out which of those pieces John had written. I'm wondering if you could tell that story.
Right.
To the
It
audience.
was a great part of the hunt because I knew I wanted to try to bring out all of McPhee, and not bring out his Time magazine, it would be incomplete. So I went first to the Time magazine archives, which are at the New York Historical Society, and they at first I was blocked because they said, well, there are no bylines. Then eventually they put me in touch with the man who for many years was the archivist for Time Inc. And he had the pass key to get in the sense that he told me about a series of bound volumes of Time magazine going back decades, where in every issue after publication, the copy editors had written with a bright red grease pencil, which happily didn't decompose, the initials of the author of every article. So all of a sudden, it was all in front of me. I just had to go through 8 years of Time magazine, every page, to see where there was a JM, which had its own complications because it turned out there was another JM during his period, but it was obvious by his writing which one it was. And eventually, I documented more than 500 articles that McPhee did for Time magazine, because McPhee has been prolific in everything he's done. And I have excerpts from about 75 of them. And this really is new McPhee in the sense that nobody knew before what it was. And it's just brilliant and funny, and it's great reading.
Did that jog John's memory of all of things that he had written and perhaps forgotten about?
He did. It did. We had a funny game where I gave him the list of the articles, and I said, I want you to tell me which of these you did not write. And he took it very seriously.
And you would play too?
Right.
You would guess,
the
and
whole
he
list.
would guess.
So eventually we knocked off a few of them, which he said, no, I don't think I wrote that. He probably did write it, but he didn't remember. He has an incredible memory. And it triggered memories of writing these stories. He, for example, he wrote a wonderful profile of Richard Burton and had this incredible experience of writing about him in London and going to Wales, and we recounted that experience.
Yeah, amazing. I know from the class this morning where you taught John McPhee's essay structure, that he takes great pains in how he plots out the organization and the structure of his pieces. And your own book, I thought, was kind of organized in an interesting, very readable way. You don't organize his work chronologically. You break it up according to books and articles and screenplays. But then you also have interesting sections on, you have a full list of John McPhee's editors. You have a list of many of the books that John McPhee students have written, and I'll get to that in a second. You have a list of all of the books that his daughters have published, which is pretty extraordinary. And I'm wondering, how did you alight on this particular kind of organizing structure for your book?
So some of it was my going in idea, and then I had good conversation with my editor at Princeton University Press, who suggested some other approaches, and some of it I just kind of figured out as I went along, including one day I had a chance conversation with somebody about the television show Deadwood, and how somebody came up with something called the Deadwood Bible, which was all about Deadwood, this HBO show. And I was fascinated, even though I'd never seen this Deadwood program. I bought the Deadwood Bible, and I read it, and it inspired me to come up with even more categories, because it was all about categorization of a work. For example, that helped inspire me that I listed out all the dedications in his books and explained who the people were. Because I always find I kind of go crazy sometimes when I see a dedication. I have no idea why they're dedicated. So it was definitely an iterative process and a lot of fun.
Yeah. What did you learn or discover about John's work that you didn't know going in? Like, looking back on this project, what were the big kind of just discoveries that you made along the way?
I think I saw that the range of his work was far wider than I ever imagined. That he wrote about more subjects, and not just in different books, but within books. That the range of his writing is just the kind of the curiosity of his mind was incredible, just amazing. But I also saw that he was definitely one of the most determined people I had ever met, which you could guess just by his output. I mean, here's somebody who's written more than 35 books, who for quite a number of years was producing a book a year, which is just astonishing. But he is such a disciplined, determined person.
Yeah.
And I don't think I knew that going in.
I mean, in retrospect, I think careers look like straight lines, directly to success. And one of the things I was struck by when I read your book is some of the obstacles and some of the bumps he encountered along the way. He started as a fiction writer. I guess he wrote his thesis in the form of a novel. He published some early short stories. It took him a number of years to finally break into the New Yorker, which was clearly his goal and kind of a lifetime dream. I wonder if you might comment on that, on some of the bumps, and you mentioned earlier his persistence.
He was definitely somebody who got through a lot of things. I think one of the bumps, which is interesting, is he had bumps in his personal life as well. He was married young, and his marriage didn't play out. He had 4 children. He got divorced. It was a very painful experience, and he's written a little bit about this. He's a private person, but he had lost some of his confidence, and he was working on really for him a big book, which was Encounters with the Arch Druid. For people who don't know it, it's a book about David Brower, the great conservationist, and his kind of arguments around the country on different trips with other developers. And McPhee, when writing it, was suffering from kind of a lack of confidence, and he did something that he's always done a little bit, kind of on steroids, which was he'd always read his work out loud. But in the case of this book, he read the entirety of the book, 60,000 words, over the telephone to Robert Bingham, who was his treasured editor at the New Yorker, over a period of months. And that's how they edited the manuscript.
Amazing.
By talking over the phone. So he found ways, he's always found ways to get over obstacles and to keep going forward.
Yeah. I was also struck he had to kind of try out for the New Yorker, right? I mean, he had to write and submit, and it took him a while to break through.
Which is a great story because he says he could have wallpapered several rooms with his rejections of actual articles he wrote that they rejected. Finally, he got closer, and the man who was the deputy editor, who was really a shield for William Shawn, the editor, said, well, give me a few articles, ideas. He gives him 3 or 4 ideas. One of them is about Bill Bradley. And the person says, well, go ahead on any of them except the basketball player. We just did one of those. It turns out 2 years ago they'd run a profile of Bob Cousy. So that was the New Yorker's quota for basketball. So McPhee, again, an incredibly determined person, writes a 5,000-word letter, typing, right, in response to this deputy editor about why he thinks he should write only about Bill Bradley, and why that's the greatest story.
Yeah.
And so the deputy editor took that to Shawn, and
Yes.
word comes back to McPhee, okay, we'll take a look at that.
Oh, wow.
So he writes the article about McPhee.
Yes.
Shawn agrees to publish it, makes him a staff writer, and that becomes his first book.
Yeah. Amazing. The letter, the 5,000 word letter, defending his choice of subject. Have you thought about publishing a collection of his letters? There's one hanging on the wall, which he wrote to me after I told him that the class of '80 had endowed a fund to provide every new member of our community a copy of the Headmaster. And it's a beautifully written letter. It's more beautifully written than I think any letter I've ever penned, and he probably has a lot of those. And I'm wondering, did you read his letters? Did you see
The
did you
letters
see the
I've read of
5,000?
his, again, remember, he's a very private person.
Yes.
The letters I've read were mostly ones that were in the Farrar, Straus, and Giroux archives.
Yes.
Where he's mostly, in a very, well, not a gentle way, hectoring his editors to try to send out more copies in advance of his books.
Yes.
He's talking about his royalties.
Yes.
But and then being John McPhee, his personal letters are not anywhere
Yes.
except with him.
Yes.
And I think the decision ultimately will be his whether he
Yes.
wants those to be.
Yeah.
But they are fertile ground, I'm sure.
Yeah, I bet. You mentioned how diverse his subjects are, and what an incredible range of subjects he's worked on over the course of his life. I'm wondering, do you see a shape to his career in terms of the things that have captured him and the movement across time?
Well, he's said many times, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, that 90% of what he's written about were subjects that he was interested in before he was 10 years old.
That's amazing.
And I think he really has been a consistent person. His interest in sports, his interest in the outdoors, but there have also been many things that have developed over time. He has an incredibly curious mind. I think Deerfield was a really important laboratory for him. Most obviously, he ultimately wrote a book about Frank Boyden.
Yes.
But less obviously was that it sparked his interest ultimately in geology, which became 20 years of his life.
Yeah.
Frank Conklin, who was a well-respected geology teacher at Deerfield, was an important influence on him and helped convince him to write the
Yes.
Boyden book. But many years later, it was because of that beginning interest in geology that he wrote about.
Interesting. One of your interviewers last night, Sylvie, approached me afterwards and said we have to bring back geology at Deerfield. So,
But the other one I want to mention is lacrosse.
Yeah.
Because McPhee came here as a basketball player, even though he's not very tall.
Yeah.
He was a good basketball player. He was a high scorer on the team when he was here.
Yeah.
But when he left the gym one day, another teacher came up to him and said, "Have you ever played lacrosse?" And he said, "No." And he learned to play lacrosse, was on the varsity lacrosse team. But more importantly, probably, he's written much about lacrosse over the years.
Yeah.
Really elevated as a subject.
Yeah. It seems like some of his early books were short profiles, and he did a number on athletics. And then he started to move into ecology and environmental subjects. Tell me a little bit about that interest of his, and how that happened. And you mentioned the geology course. In the middle of his career, he wrote a series of books on geology, and I'm just curious about his interest there.
Well, one of the big influences on him and his life was the camp that he went to called
Yes.
Keewaydin.
Yeah.
It's in Vermont. And he went there from probably about age 6 and was not done with it until about 21 or 22 when he was a counselor. His father, who was a physician and was the physician for all the Princeton University's athletic teams, was hired as the summer doctor at this camp.
Huh.
And his mother would run the camp store. So they would move there every summer. And that's where he really got interested in the natural world, in canoeing and in nature. And I think that really sparked a lot of it. And that he knows a lot of people connected. Much later, in recent years, Michael Eisner wrote a book about camp.
Oh,
And
really? I didn't know that.
He was a Kuwaitan person, and he got McPhee to write the foreword for that.
Oh, he did.
Yep.
Is that the only time he's written about the camp?
He's written about it. Well, no, he wrote about turning over in a canoe,
Yeah.
swimming with canoes.
Yeah.
He's written some other things,
Yeah.
but it's been a really important,
Yeah.
really important influence in
Yes,
his life.
I'm going to have to read the Eisner book. I've always thought that residential schools should be
Well,
more like.
at least read the foreword.
Yeah, I will. I will read the foreword. Turning to the writing process, which he started to write more about later in his career. There are some wonderful pictures in your book of drafts with his edits, his revisions, notes he took, outlines, including the outline for the Headmaster. And I'm curious what you learned about McPhee's writing process over the course of researching this book.
Again, it's determined. He's really wants it to be everything it can be. It's really disciplined. And it's, to the point, some people might think of it as being almost anal, that he had a process of, he would take notes, always on paper, rarely used a tape recorder because he thought it made people stiff. He tried to
really?
get people to do something with him, not to, sit across a table from them, so they would be revealed in a different way. Then he would type up his notes, and he would start the process of figuring out the structure for his book. And the Headmaster is a perfect example, and he gave all his research materials to Deerfield, so they're in the archives here. And you could see that he categorized all of Frank Boyden's activities, whether it's Amherst, fundraising, athletics, whatever, and he assigned it a letter. And then he would mark up all his notes and put the letter on the right thing. And then he would use scissors and cut up the pieces of paper, and later did this on a computer, and have all the material about athletics together. And then he would figure out within his structure of what he was going to write about how it was going to work together. So the writing process was a real process.
Yes.
And it's paid off for him. And one of the things which I think makes him so remarkable, and one of the most extraordinary things about him, is how he has always experimented. And you look at his 35 odd books, none of them are alike. He always does different things structurally. He's always trying to learn and grow. And I think that's what's inspired so many writers, that here is this writer who's with incredible talent who didn't just write by a formula.
Yeah. As you were working on the book, did you gather any insights about how he decides on an article he wants to write, or like how does he discover his subjects?
He discovers it, interestingly, through his world. Through an enormous number of his books came out of conversations he had with friends, some from Deerfield, some from Princeton, other places, where they suggested things. A good example is coming out of the country, which was really his breakout book about Alaska, came out of his long friendship with a man named John Kaufman, who was Princeton class of 45. McPhee was 53. They taught together for a year at the Hun School. And then they stayed in touch. They were friends. And eventually, Kaufman became a planner for for the National Park Service. And he was sent to Alaska to try to plan out a couple of national parks there. And he kept telling McPhee about it. And eventually McPhee was inspired to want to write a book about Alaska. So that, I think, is a typical kind of experience where it wasn't like somebody gave him a fully formed idea,
Yeah.
but he, just by being in touch with the world and having this huge network of people, many of whom came through Deerfield or Princeton, he was exposed to a lot of different ideas.
Yeah. You mentioned just a moment ago that he likes to kind of interview people as they're working. And he almost reminds me of like an embedded war correspondent. Like it seems to be one of the ways in which he researches. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how he gathers his material and how he goes about researching.
Well, he tries to, in effect, get people to go into their natural habitat.
Yeah.
Ewell Gibbons, the great, writer about natural foods and other things, he went on a several-day trip with him, where they foraged for their own food.
Uh-huh.
Or the encounters with the Archdruid, he went on these 4 elaborate trips around the country. Or Bill Bradley, he just spent an enormous amount of time with him, and came up with details you wouldn't have come up with otherwise. For example, he talks about a time where he went to watch Bill Bradley practice at the gym in Lawrenceville near Princeton.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Bradley was missing all his shots, and he couldn't figure it out. And Bradley said, the hoop is at the wrong height. And McPhee didn't believe it. And the next day, came back with a stepladder and a tape measure and measured the hoop, and it was at the wrong height.
Interesting.
So his reporting was very much kind of hands-on, being there.
Interesting. You mentioned earlier he has a section, you have a section in the book with some of his reviews. Does he read his reviews?
I think he reads some of them.
Yeah.
At least for part of his career, when there were more book reviewers and he had, his big name, there probably were too many to read.
Yeah.
So I think he doesn't like grouse about them.
Yes.
He's really writing for himself and for the reader.
Yeah.
But he notices them.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about his teaching. There's an amazing photo again in your book of McPhee at his Princeton office, and behind him are literally the hundreds of books that his students have written. And what have you been able to learn about McPhee as a teacher? What makes him unique and special?
So this was a real revelation to me. I didn't know very much about his teaching career. I knew he taught some course at Princeton, but I didn't realize what an institution it was, where he taught for nearly 50 years a writing seminar, and it was something which was highly competitive to get into, not because he wanted it to be competitive, but so many people wanted to be in it. And he taught his version of the craft of writing. But he also is an incredibly loyal and caring person. And in the process, he became kind of bonded to these students, and became a mentor for them, not only while they're at Princeton, but for years later.
Yeah.
I mean, he still hears from so many of his students asking for his advice about things or showing him things. He's really been an incredibly generous and serious teacher about writing.
Yeah. What do you know about his actual classroom practice? Like, how does he conduct class? When I was reading your book, I was wondering if there's actually any filmed images of him actually in the classroom teaching or working with students. But did you?
I don't think there's any video.
Yeah.
There are a couple of photos, but it doesn't really get to part. It's a series of exercises.
Yeah.
It always started with the people in his class pairing off alphabetically.
Yes.
And interviewing each other and writing a profile of each other. And this has been the stuff of lifelong friendships,
Yes.
the people who happen to be paired.
Yeah.
But there were other assignments. He would have them go out on campus and look for things. But the heart of his class was always the session he had every other week. He would spend most of an hour with every student talking about their writing. and they would really kind of get into it and in a very textual way talk about an assignment and what they hoped to do and where they fell short, what worked. And it was that kind of very close-in editing. And I've had the really amazing experience that as I've been doing events for this book, I've done a number of them, as many as I could, with distinguished former students of his.
Wow.
People like Mark Fisher from the Washington Post, or Jennifer Weiner, who's a best-selling novelist, or other people. And one of the things that they've done, without even me asking, is they've brought to our sessions, our public sessions, assignments from McPhee
Oh, wow.
30, 40, 50 years ago with his comments in the margins. And they would read aloud his marginalia. And it was a mix of things that some were funny, some were pretty biting,
Yes.
but it was always very on point.
Yeah.
So he's a really careful reader, but a really caring and supportive reader.
Yeah. I think I read in your book that he, when he's teaching, he doesn't write. Is that
Right.
is that accurate?
He took every time he taught, he took a few months off from writing. It was almost like a sabbatical. And
Yeah.
he talked about how it recharged him and
Yeah.
how much he got from that
Yeah.
process.
Amazing. He was around, has been writing long enough to have had the good fortune of having his former teachers serve as his editors. So I didn't know that until I read your book that David Rumnick was his student, and then subsequently his
Still his editor.
at the New Yorker. So he works directly with Rumnick when he publishes.
He does.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And they also go fishing together.
And they also go fishing together.
McPhee is a big fly fishing person,
Yeah.
and Remnick is as well.
That's a perfect transition to my next question as we bring this to a close. I was wondering if you had cooked any of the shad recipe that McPhee includes in his book on shad, history of shad fishing.
I did. My curiosity was piqued enough that I did buy shad,
You
which
did?
I never had, and I cooked it. I don't think I cooked it to the high standards of some of the recipes in his book, but it was delicious.
Yeah. My grandmother loved shad roe in particular, so that's why I know shad. Do you have a favorite non-New Yorker essay of McPhee's?
Non-New Yorker. I think that one that comes to my mind, which is totally obscure, is about one of his daughters. All of his daughters have gone into creative work. They're writers, translators, literary translators, art historians. One is a photographer. And the one who's a photographer, Laura, for a number of years did a series of large format photographs in collaboration with another female photographer. And McPhee wrote an essay called Under the Cloth, which is about the experience of watching Laura and the partner photographer work. And it was just vintage McPhee. You learn about photography, you learn about these two women. It's just hilarious.
Right. I will read that. And other than the Headmaster, do you have a suggestion for a starter book for a young reader of McPhee?
I think it should be driven by what they're interested in. For example, if you're interested in sports, I think that the Sense of Where You Are or Levels of the Game about tennis are just spectacular books. If you're interested in the environment, Encounters with the Arch Druid, is that if you're interested in transportation, he did a book that was called Other Carriers. It was just one of his more recent books. But there were just so many different specialties. So I would encourage people to kind of look through his catalog, or you could look through my book, and see what he's written about and choose. There's almost something, I hope there's something for everyone.
Yeah, that's great. I gave you this assignment.
Uncommon Carriers. I don't want to be wrong with the title. Uncommon Carriers.
Uncommon
is the
Carriers.
transportation.
Great. So I gave you this assignment a mere few hours ago, but I thought we would end by me asking you to read your favorite passage from the Headmaster.
So, which is hard to choose.
Very hard to
Because
choose. I went through this exercise myself.
And the one I chose is one that I think just shows one of the incredible facets of Frank Boyden that John McPhee captured. And one of the things that I think is so effective about the Headmaster is that it's there's an expression about writing, show, don't tell.
Yes.
Which is, don't just tell people what you think, show them so
Yes.
they'll learn. And I think that the Headmaster does that incredibly. The examples are just incredible. So here's a really brief example
Great.
of that. And it's about, well, I don't know if it needs any more context. A few days later, a boy asked him, Frank Boyden, if he would like to go outside and have a catch with a baseball. The two of them went out onto the school lawn and stood about 50 feet apart. The boy wound up and threw a smoke ball at him, apparently with intent to kill. Boyden caught the ball and fired it back as hard as he could throw it. A kind of match ensued, and the rest of the students collected to watch. The Headmaster and the boy kept throwing the baseball at each other with everything they had. Finally, the boy quit. Of course, I was wearing a glove, and he wasn't, says the Headmaster, who was a craftsman of the delayed throwaway line. So I'm not sure. I'm sure you have a lot of talents, but I'm not sure you would take on having a baseball throwing match.
I don't think so.
But Frank Boyden was an incredibly athletic-oriented person, even though he wasn't a skilled athlete. And that was one of the ways that he showed who he was.
Yes.
And one of the things that McPhee does masterfully in this book is, showing people how Boyden did that.
Yep.
And with example after example.
Great. Noel, thank you so much for being here.
Oh,
It was
thank
great
you. What a
talking with
pleasure.
Yeah, it was great talking with you.